So the other day, I asked you guys in a poll a very simple question. Which art style do you prefer in Zelda games? Realistic or more stylized? While I thought it would be a 50-50 split, to my surprise, over 70% of people preferred stylized Zelda games to the mere 28% that didn't. So then I asked a follow-up poll to this question, which was how often would you like to see Nintendo release stylized games versus realistic ones? But this time I had 3 answers, being mostly stylized games with some realistic games every so often, mostly realistic games with some stylized games every so often, or a 50-50 balance of realistic and stylized Zelda games. And despite what the previous polls results showed, these answers yet again surprised me. But before we get on to those results, I think it's important to understand how we got here, why I'm making this video on a topic that I really don't hear people talk about. And that's of course why I'm getting tired of stylized Zelda games. Well, I'm like sorta getting tired of them. I'm more getting tired of how often they're being used. And just for clarification here, when I say stylized, I mean the Zelda games that stray away from looking realistic. Having cartoony portions like Wind Waker, cell shading like Breath of the Wild, or having a painting style like Skyward Sword. Those types of things. Because I really like each of these styles in their own right. They are all used very well to complement the game world that they're in. And it's just great to see that one single series can change the style so seamlessly between all the entries. But now I feel they're being used to a point where the impact of a new style just doesn't stand out anymore. Because before, I thought they had a great balance of realistic games and stylized cartoony ones. And now it's... You know what? To better understand where I'm coming from in the matter, I think we need to go back to where this all started, when the very first art style was introduced and built up to Zelda art styles now. Alright, Ocarina of Time, the first 3D Zelda game. See, before this, Zelda games were always trying to be more realistic. And this is just because, well, graphics were evolving at a fast pace, so companies kept wanting to make their games more and more realistic to show off what their hardware could do. And that was just the case with Zelda as well, which led to the style seen in Ocarina of Time. It was a very literal translation of the 2D sprites into a 3D form. And while yes, it has aged, for me personally, the designs of the characters were some of my favorites when looking at the artwork for the game. And then the game right after, Majora's Mask, shared the same art style. But this was short-lived, because the next Zelda game after that, Nintendo already went for a different look to Zelda. The Wind Waker, and as you can see, it has a cel-shaded, very cartoony-like visual look. And it's funny, now everyone loves this style and says it's aged well, but back then, people hated this. Games and consoles kept getting more realistic with every generation, but Zelda goes for a kid's look? This is child's play, is what the fans were saying. But when it came out, my take on it was that I wasn't really following Zelda games at the time, I just kind of played whatever, but from what I've heard, this is how people seem to react. And Nintendo also heard the response because they were originally going to make their next Zelda game to follow this style. But yeah, after the backlash, they made the game that everyone wanted. The realistically dark Zelda game, Twilight Princess. And yes, at the time, everyone loved it. But yeah, once again, funny enough, it seemed like the people have flipped their opinion about these two styles of games. Because now everyone seems to love the style of the Wind Waker and say that Twilight Princess hasn't aged well. Personally, I just really like the look of Twilight Princess. All the designs and characters just seem to be the most iconic out of all the different iterations of them. And for me, especially after the HD release, I think the visuals do look great. But after this, once again, they went for a completely new style in Skyward Sword. Really unlike anything we've seen before. The visuals are all bright and make you feel like you're in a work of art. This is because they did actually take inspiration from Picasso paintings. And personally, I love this style. Definitely an underrated look for the Zelda series. And also, I'd say at this point, I was very happy with how they were handling the different art styles in the games. I thought they had a lot of variance between the quote-unquote stylized games versus the more realistic ones. It seemed like every main series 3D Zelda game alternated between styles, which was great. But then, after this, things got crazy. Because the Wii U was coming out. It was Nintendo's first HD video game console, which was a big deal. And since the last Zelda was all stylized, it only made sense for the next one to be more realistic. And at first, it seemed like Nintendo agreed when they released this Zelda Wii U tech demo. Just look at this, it's the HD Zelda we've all dreamed about. Link looks so cool, the enemies looked epic, and the environments were just like the artwork. And after this, we got a trailer for a spin-off Zelda game known as Hyrule Warriors. But the significance of this was it was the first time where we got a look of what this art style actually looked like in a game. Look at Link again. Beautiful. This was the Zelda world from our imaginations. Then after that, there were more games that showed Zelda characters in HD. Smash Bros. For the Wii U was shown off, and damn, the Link seemed to use this art style too, and it looked just as good. So what a great build-up and tease for what the first HD Zelda game would look like on the Wii U. There were so many games that showed off this style, and it was all building up to one great first HD Zelda game, and when that trailer was finally shown off, and it was another cel-shaded, stylized Zelda game. Listen, okay, Breath of the Wild is probably like the best Zelda game ever, but at this point in time, I was just looking for more of a change, more of an accurate interpretation in HD. Zelda just has so much potential for this type of style that just hasn't been utilized. There are so many gorgeous and imaginative locations in Zelda that I just want to see in a full realistic makeover. And after Breath of the Wild comes the most recent Zelda game that we got, which was a remake of an older Zelda game called Link's Awakening. But this time they completely changed the art style. And it looked awesome, seriously. It was like controlling a virtual Link toy in this diorama-esque world. Everything looked great and totally unique. But this is where I really started to realize that maybe I would have liked this style more if it came out at a time where we weren't just seeing stylized Zelda games. Because as I played further and further into the game, I just kept saying things like, yeah, that boss looks cool, but man, he would have looked way more threatening or daunting if he was realistic. Or, yeah, that mountain looks great, but it would look better and more natural if they made it like real rocks. And it wasn't just me either this time. There was actually a lot of debate regarding this art style online. Some people loved it, while others even refused to buy the game because of how much they hated it. Yes, and that brings us to present day with no sign of a realistic style ever returning. We do know what the next 3D Zelda game is, and it's a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild in the same art style. And after that, who knows? We could see a more realistic game, but I don't know, it's just not seeming like that's the direction they're going in. But what about the poll at the start of the video, I hear you say? Don't most people like the stylized look, so isn't this a good thing that the style appeals to most fans? Well, yes, that is true that more people like stylized games, but now I think it would be a good time to go over the results of my next question, being how often would you like to see each style of Zelda games? Because surprisingly, 63% of people would prefer a balance between both styles, a 50-50 split if you will. And in fact, just over a quarter of people want mostly stylized games. And no one is wrong in their answers in this poll, you are all entitled to like what you like. But it seems now Nintendo is not doing what a majority of people would actually like to see, and is really only appealing to a quarter of Zelda fans. Well, at least from the people in this sample size. But they do balance the art styles, right? Well, no, I'm gonna completely disagree with you on that. It's like they are specifically only making stylized Zelda games. Seriously, if you look at all the Zelda games they've made since the first stylized game, being Wind Waker, there has only been one realistic Zelda game. And don't forget that Twilight Princess was only made in the style that it was due to fan backlash from the Wind Waker. They would have kept every game stylized as far as I know if no one said anything. And not only that, right, I haven't forgotten about the handheld games either, because since the Wind Waker, they've all been stylized. They either went for Wind Waker's big head style or a new chibi mini style like Link Between Worlds. And that means that the single outlier throughout all these years is Twilight Princess, a game that only made the way it was because of fan criticism of the art style. And a game that is now 15 years old, so I'd say we're long overdue for a more realistic look again. And I don't really get why they're going in this route. In all the hardware tech demos, they show an awesome realistic Link style. In Smash Bros. And other spin-off games, it's all classic looking, but in the main series games, we're only seeing cel-shaded painting or toon styles. Plus, by only having these games look like this, I'd say it oversaturates the uniqueness of these different styles and sort of just causes them to not stick out as much. And trust me, right, last thing I want to see is this series turn into The Legend of Skyrim with every game trying to mimic real life, but by the looks of it at least, I think most people can agree that there needs to be a balance of stylized and realistic Zelda games. So that was the point of the video, just to talk about the different art styles of Zelda games and say why I want to see another realistic one. So comment and tell me what your favorite Zelda art style is. I mean, I guess I already did those polls, so I kind of have a general consensus at this point. So comment whatever you like. See ya!